The one thing that we've all looked up at since we were kids and always felt like it was something that was so glamorous, so out there, and so unachievable was the moon. And then once you grow up a little bit, you find out that actually it is achievable because men went to the moon. And in a few years' time, the first woman would be going to the moon. Where things get real interesting is the fact that the moon has its own history, its own tale. And is the one thing as a celestial body that has so much written about it across the cultural realm, ranging from Western cultures all the way to ancient Egyptian culture, all the way to ancient Indian culture. It's something that has been mentioned time and time and time again. Why are humans so fascinated by the moon? What is it about this big ball of light, as you will, in the night sky? Is it just the fact that since we were evolved enough to comprehend what it was, we always related it to be the alternative to the sun? As a matter of fact, some creatures till date are considered nocturnal purely because of the fact that they operate best without the sunlight. And I'm sure that the same goes for some humans. And the entire thing revolves around the fact that the moon has been affiliated to us since before we could even comprehend what it was. Before we knew anything about the scientific consensus around the moon, about the realities and facts, the numbers around the moon, where it came from. Prior to all of that, we were always affiliated to the moon in some way, shape, or form with culture, with stories, with folklore. Throughout the world, no matter where you're from, you've always heard about a tale about the moon. Somewhere, somehow, you've heard about something that paints the moon in this mythical picture about it being so incredible, about it being a savior of sorts of the earth. And this is scientifically accurate because, as we all are aware now, most of the meteors and asteroids that want to essentially be on a collision course with Earth end up getting intercepted by the moon, hence the craters. It's like fifth grade geography, fifth grade science essentially. What is rather more special, you could say, is the fact that there are certain things about the moon that I'm sure that you and I are not aware of whatsoever, because the regular person does not look up into so much of information that is available around the moon, knowing that as a conscious effort it's going to give him any kind of benefit. As long as you're not someone who's looking for an incentive out of what you're trying to research because you're just trying to get some knowledge because you have a curiosity, I believe you're doing nothing wrong. Staying curious is always fun, at least for some of us. And for those that aren't, there's nothing wrong with you either. You don't have to be someone who's obsessed, completely obsessed, with asking yourself difficult questions and then making sure that you find those answers, or find at least closest to what that answer could be. Personally, I never take no for an answer when I find a question in my head that I want answers to. I will go to leaps and bounds and do whatever I can in any way, shape, or form to find out what I need to find out. So, some regular stuff that we all know about the moon could be something as simple as that it's 384,400 kilometers away from the Earth. Of course. And again, that's like what you learn in school. What a lot of other people might not necessarily learn in school was the fact that it's around the same timeline as the Earth in its conception, because it's like 4.5 billion years ago. And that's billion with a B. So a billy. 4.5 billion years old. Also, the moon was formed after a giant impact between the Earth and a so-called hypothetical planet that was essentially the size of Mars, called Theia. And I know a lot of you did not know this. because I personally didn't know this. But here we are today, learning things together. The thing was, once this collision happened, it let off this huge chunk from the earth. And that chunk is essentially now tidally locked with the earth because of its gravitational influence, be it the moon. But another thing that is scientifically accurate is the fact that the moon, in a few 100,000 years, I'm not really sure of the timeline, but it's a long time from now, will essentially leave the earth's gravitational influence. Its course through space is altering. And soon, not soon in our terms, soon in terms of thousands of years, it'll come to a point wherein you will no longer be able to look up at the moon in the night sky. And that's factual, you can look it up if you want to. But now that it's here, we should also understand that where did it come from essentially? Well, it was it is essentially a reminder of this ginormous impact that happened onto the earth. It's like a scar, so it's essentially debris. The moon is debris from an impact, whether we like to admit it or not, but that's exactly what it is. Also, those of you who are wondering why did it get a spherical shape then? Well, center of mass. Anything in space when bound anything in space binds together. And because there are going to be no edges, center of mass is always going to attract more things towards the center. Thereby, what are you left with? Things cramped together under pressure for billions of years with solar radiation and such. What does that result in? It results in creating a celestial body. One that already had enough structure because it was a chunk out of the earth. And with all the forces of space, ended up becoming a sphere. What, when it comes to understanding where the human connection comes into play, it's usually when we start talking about September 1959, when the Soviet Luna 2 was crashed into the moon. Intentionally, of course. It was uncrewed. But that was essentially the first time humans made contact with the moon. After that came 1966 with Luna Line. After that came 1966 with Luna 9, which had the first soft landing ever, but it was still uncrewed. But the first crewed mission, as we all have learned, was by the United States. And the first human orbital mission around the moon was Apollo 8 in 1968. So 10 years after the first crash landing by the Russians, the Americans were doing orbits around the moon. They were in an orbital mission for a while, as a matter of fact, gathering required information for what came next. And what did come next was 6 human landing missions. 6 missions that independently put feet on the ground. From 1969 all the way to 1972. Apollo 11, as we all famously know, was July of 1969. And 1972, Apollo 17, was the last time a manned mission would go to the moon. We come across so much in terms of information in our day-to-day lives. Information that we might not necessarily choose to think about. Information that we might not choose to give any significance to. But when it comes to stuff like this, when it comes to stuff that you can actually physically witness from your own eyes, how can you not ask yourself questions about its perspective, about why it's there, about why it exists, why it is the way it is, and how long is it guaranteed to be where it is? I'm sure that no one initially wanted to go to the moon because what is up there? Even till date, up until 2024, NASA is going to finally plan on going for a settlement, a first colony, if you will, on the moon. But back in the day, people would never think about such a thing. It was just science fiction. It was something you saw in weird, goofy space movies and cartoons. But the fact of the matter is that we are quickly changing into a civilization that's going to be multiplanetary very, very, very soon. And when that time comes, you're going to be have to willing to ask yourself a question. Are you going to stay on the earth? Or are you going to be the ultimate explorer and go deep into a frontier that has never been explored before? The final frontier, if you will. Who knows what mysteries space exploration holds for us and what leaps in technology we make just because of the fact that we are now able to go and gather resources off planet, bring them back, benefit humanity as a whole. And how long before our own human problems, our own human conceptions, our own human limitations, if you will, in terms of understanding, start leaking into deep space? How long before people start turning this into their own little project, into their own little strive for power? There's always going to be people that are power hungry, and they're always among us. And the biggest example of that is that now, and there's always been a conspiracy that this has been existing for a while, but now, officially, turns out that the US is going to be putting weapons on the moon. Well, conspiracy theories at least claim that the moon has been weaponized since the 80s, that multiple countries are on there. We don't know what these equipments, weaponry, armory is going to look like. It could be all kinetic, it could all be kinetic energy based, and it could be for a legitimate reason. Maybe it's to fend off asteroids or meteors, because as we all know, the moon gets impacted way more than the earth does. So maybe it's a defense mechanism. But then again, there's always the question that maybe it isn't. Again, as I said, this podcast is meant to leave you with more questions than it was meant to leave you with answers. I hope you enjoyed this one. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care and peace.